This video is the perfect example of crowdsourcing. After a bit of a lull, all the deliveries started resuming and then we were sitting on a pile of phones suddenly. So instead of racking our brains and wasting time trying to figure out what kind of video we should make for you guys, we decided to do a vote and you guys decided that we should be doing a camera comparison between the iPhone SE, the Mi 10 and the Realme X50 Pro, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing in this video. Hi, I'm Ershad from Mr. Phone and let's get this camera comparison started where we're going to find out which one of these three, budget flagships, shall we call them, under 50,000 has the best camera setup. But before we move on, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button and the bell icon right next to it to get notified whenever Mr. Phone puts out an awesome new tech video. Also, don't forget to check out our communities over at Instagram and Telegram, links to which should be in the description below. Before we take a look at the pictures, let's compare the specs of the three phones, where Realme and Xiaomi pack 4 cameras each on the rear. Apple has a single shooter to do all the heavy lifting. By the way, the iPhone SE captures 12 megapixel pictures using the primary camera. On the other hand, the Mi 10's 108 megapixel Samsung ISOCELL bright HMX sensor can output 25.2 megapixel pixel bin samples. Finally, the X50 Pro 64 megapixel camera can create 16 megapixel pixel bin samples. So yeah, widely different outputs. But more importantly, the SE's sensor has a 1.4 micron pixel size, but the Samsung HMX on the Mi 10 and the Samsung GW1 on the X50 Pro have a pixel size of 0.8 micron. And with pixel binning, you get a final output of 1.6 microns. Alright, so I'll move on to the pictures now. You can pause here to take a closer look at the individual specs. Let's start off with our wide shot of a landscape. At first glance, without pixel peeping, the Mi 10 and the iPhone SE's shots are indistinguishable. The X50 Pro's shot looks slightly different because the contrast is lacking. It looks a little flat. On pixel peeping, you will notice that the Mi 10 offers really crisp details. Take a look at the road and the trees in the background or the terrace of the under construction building. You can see more details in the Mi 10's shot. The X50 Pro has sharp details around the center, but it gets soft around the corner. The iPhone SE is pretty sharp too, and in certain areas crisper than the X50 Pro, but these high resolution sensors are definitely causing a problem for the SE here. Now I must highlight that the Mi 10 has a tendency to crush the shadows and it doesn't do much noise correction either. Take a look at the pathway next to the colorful building to understand the difference. But let's not forget that the Mi 10 and the X50 Pro can also shoot at higher resolutions, and that is where the Mi 10 just decimates the X50 Pro with natural details and better dynamic range. For some odd reason, the 64 megapixel sample of the X50 Pro has over-sharpened details. It looks bad. So yeah, I'd pick the Mi 10 for wide landscape shots purely for the crisp details that you can achieve, plus the better contrast over the X50 Pro. The iPhone SE and the X50 Pro would be tied in second spot because if the iPhone does dynamic range and contrast better, the X50 Pro offers crisper details. Now let's quickly take a look at the dynamic range performance. One glance and we know that the Realme X50 Pro is not in the race. The phone does absolutely nothing to retrieve details from the shadows. In fact, the Mi 10 offers the best dynamic range, followed closely by the iPhone SE. Also, it is just so damn crisp at close crop despite all the noise in the shadows. Take a look at the area around the Dyson air purifier for proof. The X50 Pro and Mi 10 have the advantage of a dedicated wide-angle camera as well, but you get far better dynamic range and contrast on the Mi 10's 13 megapixel sample compared to the X50 Pro's 8 megapixel one. Even the details are not as soft as the X50 Pro. Plus you can see color fringing all across the image on the X50 Pro's sample. You can also shoot videos using the ultra wide angle camera on the phones, but the Mi 10 takes a lead here once again, as you can shoot 4K videos compared to only 1080p on the X50 Pro. When it comes to close-ups, the Mi 10's massive 108 megapixel sensor has a major issue. One, where the depth plane is so narrow that it ends up defocusing parts of the subject. From the colors to the sharpness, the iPhone SE definitely is the best of the lot. I mean, the X50 Pro is sharp too, but the colors are completely off. Also, the focus trails off on the X50 Pro around the corner of the watch. In the second image, the Mi 10 does a far better job with the focus. Plus, you can see crisper details on the X50 Pro and the Mi 10 in the area around the face. But the iPhone definitely offers better colors and generally looks more pleasing if you aren't pixel peeping. The more I use Samsung's 108 megapixel sensor on phones, the more I feel that I cannot use it daily. The narrow plane of focus in close-ups is a real issue that cannot be eliminated. I can't shoot without wondering if my eyes need to be checked for tunnel vision. I'd pick the iPhone SE as my camera for close-up shots. Now, the Realme X50 Pro is the only phone in our comparison that has a 2x telephoto zoom lens, and therefore it offers crisper, more accurate details at close crop. But thanks to the massive sensor, even the digital 2x crop is not too bad on the Mi 10. But the reds are definitely oversaturated. Plus the whole focus issue crops up again when you look at the subject in the background. The iPhone SE's digital zoom can't do much here. It doesn't look as good as the other two phones. You get a dedicated macro camera on the Mi 10, and the X50 Pro uses a telephoto to capture macro images. But the Mi 10 can go closer and offer crisper images despite being the dullest of the lot. Obviously, the iPhone's only camera cannot go as close, and if you try to, you will get an entirely blurred image like you see on your screen. But when you look at a shot in focus, as close as I could get to it and cropped in, it can give you somewhat of the crispness that you desire, and something similar to the Mi 10 and the X50 Pro as well. Anyway, that's not ideal, and therefore the Mi 10 wins, but the 2 megapixel resolution is still a major letdown. While the iPhone SE has only a single camera, it can still do semantic segmentation using machine learning for portrait shots. You can change the aperture levels in post-processing or even in pre. Plus, you get all the cool portrait lighting features, including the studio grade high key mono. So looking at the portrait samples here, you can see that the SE's capture looks immediately attractive, but it has boosted the reds on the face to make it look more appealing. When you look closely, the eyes are in focus and the facial details are on point too. The X50 Pro looks the dullest of the lot, while the Mi 10 looks the second best. When you look at the edge cutout, the SE is the most aggressive of the lot, but it has clean lines. The X50 Pro is not too bad either. The Mi 10 botches up a few areas, particularly the shirt on the right. You get cleaner cutouts on the X50 Pro and the SE. So even with a single camera, the iPhone SE showcases how good portraits are captured. Xiaomi and Realme, what's the point of adding the depth sensor? You could have easily avoided it. Why this inane urge to pad up the specs purely for marketing reasons? The selfies on the three phones look completely different. The iPhone SE has vastly boosted the colors, the reds on my face and the blues of my t-shirt especially. You have to drop the saturation in post, but it does look good purely because of the facial tones and the clean look. However, it definitely doesn't offer the same level of details as the Mi 10 or the X50 Pro, both of which are crisper. However, the Mi 10 has a very contrasty look that makes it look slightly unnatural. I think the X50 Pro is the perfect middle ground between the three. That said, the overexposed nose does look odd. Anyway, you can also shoot wide-angle selfies on the X50 Pro, and that is definitely an advantage. And when you take selfies against the light, the iPhone SE tends to blow out the background compared to the other two. All the three phones take great looking selfies, but I'd definitely go with the X50 Pro for natural color tone and crisp details. What would you pick? Now, the iPhone SE's portrait lighting features also extend to selfie portraits, but when it comes to edge cutouts, the Mi 10 blows the other two out of the water. Just look at the way it has picked out every strand of hair and done semantic segmentation to create a gorgeously clean cutout of my facial hair against the background. All the other attributes such as the details, the facial tones and more remain the same, and therefore the Mi 10 wins here, hands down. Now when it comes to selfie videos, the iPhone SE has the best stabilization and audio recording at 1080p 30fps, which is the max resolution that all these phones can shoot at. The Mi 10 would be my second camera of choice because it offers the best dynamic range, plus the sound recording is better than the X50 Pro. It is a pity that the Mi 10 doesn't have stabilization for the front camera. Hey guys, I'm shooting a 1080p 30fps video using the Mi 10 and the iPhone SE. Do let me know in the comment section below what you thought about the image quality, the image stabilization and the sound recording, as I'll pan around slightly and show you guys what happens when the light falls at dynamic range. Alright, and you can see how my face is lit up right now, and I'll go back again. And this is what it looks like. Right. So all the three phones can shoot at 4K 30fps, but the Mi 10 can go one level higher to 8K. But for the sake of the comparison, we're going to test 4K 60fps and 4K 30fps footages. In our 4K 60fps test, the iPhone SE offers the best details, accurate colors, phenomenal cinematic stabilization, and excellent voice recording. The Mi 10 only leads it with better dynamic range. And the Mi 10 right now, of course, the Mi 10 can also shoot 8K videos, so keep that in mind. But here we're testing 4K 60fps to check for image stabilization, image quality, and what it looks like when the dynamic range changes. When I shoot directly at the sun, and what the Realme X50 Pro can do. However, the 4K 30fps footage actually makes up for that by offering extended dynamic range along with cinematic stabilization, so it looks better now. So all you need to do is drop the frames per second and you can get better footage against the light. the iPhone SE wins this round easily. Since we're all cooped up indoors, quite a lot of shots are going to be taken indoors. In this shot, I can tell you that the X50 Pro and the Mi 10 have managed to capture the right color temperature. The SE has made it warm. Anyway, the X50 Pro once again captures an image that is flat with no contrast. The Mi 10 tends to crush the shadows a bit, but it looks pretty good. And you can also easily lift the shadows in post. Now, if you look at the blue curtain in the dead center, you will notice some green color fringing on the iPhone SE and the Realme X50 Pro to a certain extent. Another thing you will notice is a lot of noise around the corners of the image on the Mi 10. This is especially in the dark shadow region. The algorithm does this in order to retrieve details. Because if you take a look at the area around the Areca palm plant and the Dyson air purifier, the Mi 10 retrieves excellent details, but there is noise. The SE and the X50 Pro have a watercolor sort of effect due to the noise compression algorithm. The SE is possibly my least favorite indoor shot here. In indoor selfies, you see the same traits of color processing and facial tones. But when it comes to details, there is no beating the Mi 10. But the X50 Pro portrays natural colors, no doubt about that. So take your pick accordingly. I can live with the X50 Pro's level of detail as long as it gets my facial tone right. The biggest disadvantage on the iPhone SE is that you can't get night mode. That's not to say that it is not a capable camera in low light. You can clearly see that it holds itself on its own when you compare it against the Mi 10 and the X50 Pro without night mode. The iPhone SE gets the color temperature and the color palette spot on. From the reds to the greens that dominate this picture, the SE has captured a very true to life picture. Plus the details are better than the other two. With night mode on, the Mi 10 and the X50 Pro offer sharper details on the balcony grills near the fountain. Furthermore, if you take a look at the well-lit building in the background, the Mi 10 offers more exposure and crisper details compared to the other two. But the Mi 10 has some sort of ghosting effect happening here where you can see the lines in double. It's just weird. Anyway, the corners are sharper on the iPhone SE. Look at the bottom right corner for proof. Also, while you get more exposure on the Mi 10 and the X50 Pro due to the night mode, it's not like the overall details are significantly better or anything. If you look at the area around the Pioneer Square, the iPhone SE looks very, very crispy. But yes, if you don't have ample light, the night mode will come in handy on the Mi 10 for sure. I'd go with the Mi 10 for low light shots. With flash on, I prefer the X50 Pro and the Mi 10 because it is warm, unlike the iPhone SE, which is a little too cold, meaning you will see that the whites look bluish. In low light selfies, the iPhone SE has a lot of noise. I would not pick it. The X50 Pro offers night mode, but it is not any better than the Mi 10's regular low light selfie. So both the phones can be considered joint winners here. However, if you choose to use the flash, the SE manages to offer crisper details. The screen flash on the iPhone SE is definitely better. So after the testing process, here's the thing that I have noticed, that the iPhone SE is the best video camera under rupees 50,000. So if you're going to be vlogging or creating content for social media online, then you cannot go wrong with the iPhone SE. And it doesn't hurt that this phone can also capture good images. You get great dynamic range, the color reproduction is good as well. But the only area where it loses out to these two phones is in proper detailed reproduction. And that's where the older hardware sensor sort of falls short. So basically, the high resolution sensors on the Mi 10 and the X50 Pro can actually give you great crisp details, and that is what a lot of people will be looking out for. Now, I really like the cameras on the Mi 10. I mean, if you're taking a shot of the landscape, you get like really good crisp details, plus you can also take a 108 megapixel shot for what it's worth. Now, one of the things that the Mi 10 does is definitely do this kind of processing which I saw initially in the OnePlus 7 Pro when it had launched, where it would crush the shadows. That's happening on the Mi 10, but a lot of people might not actually prefer that kind of processing. Having said that, you can definitely fix that in post, but that's not necessarily desirable on the Mi 10. And when it comes to the Mi 10, you also get a great wide angle camera, which is obviously better than the Realme X50 Pro, and you don't get one on the iPhone SE. But the other cameras are absolutely pointless. What are you going to do with the 2 megapixel camera, macro camera, and a depth camera? Anyway, so moving on to the X50 Pro. The X50 Pro takes great selfies. That's all I can say about it. The rest of the camera setup is not very inspiring. Obviously, I mean, Realme had to cut costs somewhere, and that is on the camera setup. Having said that, this is the most versatile of the three phones, where you get a proper wide angle, a proper telephoto, and a main camera as well. So gun to my head, if I had to pick one phone between the three, it would have to be the iPhone SE, because it's a well-rounded performance. You get good pictures, you get good selfies, and you also do get great video recording. So I mean, I would go with the iPhone SE, despite the fact that it only has a single camera. Obviously, I do miss out on the versatility of the Mi 10 when you get something like the wide angle camera, but you know what, I'll live with it. So what do you guys think? What would be your choice? Well, let me know in the comment section below. Until next time, this is Ershad from Mr. Phone signing off. Goodbye and Godspeed, my friends.